Okay, I'm going to open this up. We will get everything started. Everybody get nestled in.
Yeah.
And, oh, let me do this. It's going to take us a sec to get everything going. But we are here and we are representing all four elements, which is nice. I always think that's cute. I like the craft. Okay. Sorry, Sonia's like the worst one. Okay. Um,
That's hard.
all right, so I think we're here. We're good. Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name is Krista. The internet knows me as Practical Astros. And I'm here with my student sister witch astrologer collective. We've made this thing up called Asteri, Sofia, Kairos, and it's basically just a container to get together and talk about astrology and about our studies. We met at Nightlight Astrology School, and we are all practicing astrologers. I'm going to give everybody a chance to introduce themselves. But you can find me on the internet at Practical Astros pretty much anywhere. And from then, I'm going to pass it down to Sonia because in the Brady Bunch scheme of my screen, she is right next to me. So, Sonia, you're up.
Hello. Yeah, I'm Sonia from Celestial Astrology. So that's where you can find me on the internet, on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter. I'm a Hellenistic astrologer. I offer astrology readings, but also astro coaching and mindfulness. So you can find me there. And I'll pass it up to Shauna.
Hi, I'm Shauna. I'm a certified Hellenistic astrologer. I get to hang out with these lovely ladies more often than I probably should, but I love it. And you can find me on Twitter as Smart Astro, two S's on purpose, and on Instagram as Figures of Heaven. Books are opening as of today, actually. Hopefully, I'll have a link to share soon. And yeah, otherwise, you can DM. Thanks.
That's so exciting, Shauna. I didn't know that. I'm Janessa. You can find me at By Jove Astro on Instagram, By Jove Astrology on Twitter, byjoveastrology.com. And yeah, like Krista said, I met these nice ladies through Nightlight Astrology. I'm also certified, going through year 2 at the moment. And yeah, I've got readings that I offer, a variety of them at this point, and I have something exciting launching in April, so stay tuned for more on that. But yeah, I think that's it.
Awesome. So we have the chat open on YouTube. I think you can chat there. Within this, it might be a little wonky, but you can put your questions in that you have just about April in general. April is like the dumpster fire of 2024, but it's the dumpster fire that will rise out of the ashes from and be beautiful exotic flowers by October, I'm sure. So put any questions that you have there just in general. We're going to talk a lot about all the things that are going on. We have about 15 charts that we're going to slowly go through. And I, as I was prepping for just looking at what we were going to talk about today, I kind of paused and like, why do we do this? Like, why do we look ahead? Why do we look at what's coming? Like, what do people come to astrology for? And you come to astrology for lots of different reasons. Usually, you're trying to find context with your circumstances or your situations in life, or you're wanting to get some guidance or like life hack through magic. But honestly, it's just nice to find some sort of witnessing by the stars, like the as above, so below. Like we know it's going on so below because we live it. And sometimes it's nice just to see that reflection. It makes you feel a little seen by whatever is up there, whether it's the gods or God or the oracle or the universe or the matrix or whatever you want to call it. There is something else that is unseen that the astrology gets these little like pinpricks of light that come through that act as stars, and we get to kind of get these secrets, it feels like. So to me, that's why we do this, is just to glimpse ahead, to feel seen, feel connected, and get some sort of context, because I feel like April, we're going to want some context. With that, I'm going to share my screen and to show the first chart, which is such an April Fool's joke. Mercury goes retrograde at 27 degrees Aries. So, who wants to start us off with Mercury retrograde? We're already under the shadow. We're going to be in Mercury retrogrades throughout the fire signs this year. Mercury's going to spend more time in fire than all of the other signs combined. My friend Gary, Caton, astrologer, kind of let me glimpse into that Mercury is going to be on fire through retrogrades this whole year. And so I feel like we're going to have to get used to a fiery Mercury, but a fiery retrograde Mercury. And we're starting us off now. So on the 1st, in about 4 days, it's going retrograde. So who wants to launch us off with a retrograde delineation? This is the chart of the moment for the retrograde, at least.
Yeah, I've got a feeling here about this Mercury retrograde at the moment that he's feeling a bit unsupervised, because there's no sight to any of his rulers in his bound or decan. He can't see Mars, he can't see Saturn. So there's this, or Jupiter, or any of those usual rulers that would be looking at Mercury. And Mercury we know as like this messenger planet. He can go to places that the other planets can't go. He goes out of bounds. Even the moon, he goes beyond those places. And there's kind of that sense of that happening where there's no sight from any of these rulers looking after him. So there's a sense that we may tune into things that we've not been aware of before here. When he goes retrograde, we're brought into things that we've maybe not looked at before, things that we've covered before, but we see in new and different ways. And I think that's coming through even more strongly here without the other planets. Their eyes are busy on other matters. So I really get this sense of things, if you're willing to take this time for reflection, we're always told all the RE words: reflect, revise, redo. But I think it's a really strong time if you really go into that reflection and maybe spend time in meditation and everything, that Mercury could have messages for you. Watch out for omens and symbols and things that are repeating for you because of this unsupervision. I don't know how that feels to you guys, but it just feels, usually there's some sort of planet that's got some sort of something to say. But I'm really getting that feel quite strongly. I don't know how you feel. If anybody else feels that as well.
Yeah,
actually, I think unsupervised is a really great word for it.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that, Mercury. Oh, sorry, Krista.
No. Go.
Mercury being this. Mercury being psychopomp, he likes to travel between worlds, and I feel like this just gives a full opportunity to jump back and forth, play mind games, make you think ahead and then come back to it again. All those rewords, like you mentioned.
Yeah, it got my attention when you were talking about the unsupervision. So Mercury is in Aries. Aries is ruled by Mars. Mars is in the next door sign of Pisces. So in Hellenistic astrology, they can't see each other by traditional sight, right? But then I was thinking, well, Mars is in Pisces, and Pisces rules Jupiter by domicile, but it rules Venus by exaltation. And one of the reasons why Venus exalts in Pisces in kind of the archetypal way is Pisces holds like memory and longing, and it's like the keeper of memory. And we, when you think of grief, the reason, or one reason that we grieve is because we have this love of the memory of the people that are no longer around. And so we grieve them because that same amount of love, we don't have a place to give it to them. So it kind of just floats around our bodies, trying to find a receptacle outside of us. And so that grief and that longing is there because of the memory. So Venus in Pisces likes to remember. It has kind of that that looking back, it thinks back, and it collects all of the memory. And a retrograde Mercury also is kind of a return to things. And so I just imagine, but like Mercury retrograde in Aries and Venus in Pisces, but the Mars in Pisces also kind of like looking up at the moon, longing, and not really sure why they're upset or why they're remembering things, but it's because they can't see each other, because they're too close to each other, but then they're just, oceans apart. I don't know. It has this return to something that maybe might feel a little bit hard to grasp, because it's so close to each other. I don't know if that makes any sense, but it's just kind of like the vibe that's coming through me is like this, a little bit of a heartache, a little bit of wanting to find some sort of anchoring in grief and love, in the Pisces Aries charts or places in your chart. But there's this return to something or remembering of something. And Mars usually isn't like a pause and reflect sort of a thing, but in Pisces, maybe he's kind of forced to be. Does that make sense to anybody, or is that just word salad?
Yeah, totally. The other thing I noticed was we've got, check me if that's right, because I'm not great on these. Krista's the best at antishas, but is there an antisha between the North Node and Saturn? It's just a couple of degrees out, but that could speak to.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. Do you do antisha to points? I'm never sure if it's just planets or if it's points. Because I was looking at that too of how close are we to that antisha, because that's the one thing that Pisces and Aries can have with each other, is that sharing of light, but just on the either side of that equinox point. So, but I'm not sure if you do antisha to nodes. I don't know. If you know in the chat, put it in there, because I'm unclear.
Yeah, because that would help, especially with that node being involved in the upcoming eclipse. It's kind of like a possible precursor, if you can get into what's going on in Pisces and the Saturn there, that maybe there's something unseen and hidden at the moment, but Saturn and the North Node having a potential conversation about it already.
Yeah, I see in the chat, Enchanted Diana says it's going to be the last Mercury retrograde of my Mercury year. I read it as I'm very much mercurially done. Same. This is my last Mercury retrograde of my Mercury year, 8th house Mercury year. So, I like Mercury retrogrades. Knock on wood. Famous last words. But what's interesting is like, okay, well, Mercury sped through Aries because it's doing his job, and he goes all the way to 27 degrees and has to go back. So that's why he's spending so much time in Aries. He's not going to get out of Aries until May 15th. So the entire month of April, it's Mercury retrograde or under the shadow. So I just feel like that is the first layer, the dumpster fire kindling that we're going to experience for April, is that Mercury is retrograde in Aries. Like, you can just have that as like a calendar event for the entire time, because that's just always going to be there. And we start on the 1st, so it really does launch us off. But it doesn't have to be all bad. I mean, retrogrades aren't inherently malefic. They're just sometimes clumsy. But they give us that pause. Like, I like when a planet goes retrograde because it looks like a stitch. It kind of goes back, and it's like that pause to go back before we go forward. Janessa, what are your thoughts? Do you have any on this?
Yeah, I guess I've been thinking about it in terms of like a chance to pause and reflect on, because it's ruled by Mars in Aries, I think, or Mars is in Pisces, but the retrograde is ruled by Mars. So I think pausing and reflecting on like ways we can take action. Like for me, that's kind of what I already have kind of lined up for the month in terms of like my business or things I'm pursuing, is kind of like a chance to do a lot of that background work, laying the foundation for when it does go forward again, to be ready to jump in and take action. So, and reflecting on the ways that I do that.
Yeah, that's a good point, because like all the fire signs are enshrined to each other, so that trigon of the fire. So if you're like Scorpio rising, like this chart, or if you're Pisces rising, you have, you know, a fire as your second house of like how you um, like generate income. But then that trigon reaches up to the 10th house of career, and it also reaches down to the 6th house of like the day-to-day work, like what can you do day to day. And so those three houses really do speak to how do you work to, and to generate income to create that legacy. And so you can look at that fire trigon wherever it is in your chart. It's like, okay, well, is it the first house of self, and the 5th house of creativity, and the 9th house of purpose? You know, like how does that, how is that retrograde kind of feeding into that connection of those areas of life? It's a good time to pause and strategize. You know, like Aries is a really good strategy sign. It's like, what can you do? And to make it kind of go back, it's like, I imagine if you had all these plans to go somewhere and it started to pour down rain, well, maybe you just have to sit inside and kind of renegotiate what your plan is, and maybe you'll, you know, do something that's a little different than what you expect. But um, we'll probably refer back to this retrograde throughout the stream. So I'm just going to push it over to a very different vibe. I called this Neptune because, you know, hashtag Mercury retrograde. Neptune conjunct Venus, which is just hard for my mouth to say for some reason. I'm going to call on Sonia to start this because I always go to Sonia whenever I have Neptune questions. So what's your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I've been recently studying Austin Coppock's Decan course, and for him this occurs in the third decan, and he's teaching us to look at the Vedic decan classifications as well as the Chaldean ones that we usually use. And this decan is double Mars, but it's the 10 of Cups in tarot. So there's like a, what would you call it, a
completion.
Yeah, a completion there, but also an initiation as well with double Mars. That is right, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, like it looks like the bound. It's funny to have like the last decan of Pisces be Mars, and then the first decan of Pisces be Aries.
Yeah,
it's like that final end of the year to push us through to be able to be reborn. You don't necessarily associate Mars as like a Piscean thing, but Pisces have passion just as much as any of the others.
Yeah, I think that's why I was just questioning my notes there. It's like, is that right? But yeah, it's interesting because it's just past Venus's exaltation degree. So she's really on her throne there in Pisces. And that makes me think of the Queen of Cups, you know, the lady just embodying all of that watery wisdom of like intuition and just really trusting everything that comes to you through that water and that memory that you were talking about before that comes through Pisces. And then Neptune brings like really that ethereal quality, that otherworldly quality to it. So it's a really beautiful time, but it can have a shadow side of vulnerability and codependency there as well. So there's all those sweet romantic illusions that can come through, but there can also be like disillusion if it's like not built on solid foundations. If there's love coming through, but you've got those rose-tinted glasses on, and when you've got those two planets together, that's a risk. So check in with your friends. You know, if you do have those desires coming through, just make sure that it's grounded, because the archetypes I was looking at here, it was like sacred love as a mystical force, where you really feel the spiritual undertones of a connection, and like tantric love, and like the women that we really put on the pedestal, like their Virgin Holy Mary, you know, and Persephone and women like that. It's not like the darker goddesses. It's really those goddesses that are venerated and seen as beyond the material. So yeah, it's just a lovely time if you want to connect with water at that time. And you know, if you do rituals or anything, it's a really wonderful time to do anything to deepen your connection with Neptune or Venus. I think it's a really beautiful connection and time. And if you've got either of those planets in detriment, it would be a beautiful time to really start working with either of them. Okay.
We talk about remediation, and I think that trying to work with a planet when it's at that exaltation is like kind of walking into the throne room and be like, please help me. And you're in the best position of power to help me. One like kind of joking thing, I was like, this would be a great day to start a cult. So be wary of cult adjacent things maybe that you encounter that day. Maybe they have cult tendencies. All joking aside, the shadow of that is just, Neptune has this reputation of just being endless and no boundaries. And any sort of situation where there's Venusian themes, so whether it's relationships or gluttony combined with that endlessness of Neptune, boundaries are good because you see the limits and you know that things are limited, and that is actually a good thing. So you can savor it and value it. If it feels endless, there's kind of a hopelessness or a wandering that maybe you need temporarily. And luckily Venus moves pretty fast, but it also got my attention that even though Libra and Pisces can't see each other through a traditional aspect, Venus rules that south node. And so the south node is still south noding, even though the eclipse has passed, the solar eclipse is approaching. And so I feel like they might be tied to each other because that sun will move into the 15th degree, opposing that south node and just kind of highlighting it again. So those 2 days feel reminiscent of each other, like that maybe south node Libra things, whatever Libra house is for you, might be related to the Venus Neptune conjunction, just because Venus rules Libra. Shauna, Janessa, you got anything on this one?
I do, just a little one.
Yeah.
I must be on a delay. I'm sorry. It almost mirrors what's going on with Mercury too. But I thought it was interesting when I'm looking at this chart that we've got both the luminaries in a sextile to each other at the moment, but just kind of cuddling that the Venus-Neptune conjunction when it happens. So it feels like because there's no light being shown on whatever's happening at the moment, it can feel, of course, very dreamy. But I feel like it's almost where those dreams are going to get initiated once Mars comes into all of that. Mars hits Saturn, and I feel like it's gonna maybe make some more things concrete. But I think whatever is being born in that Venus-Neptune conjunction is just not gonna show up for a little while, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was noticing that too with the luminaries. And I feel like it kind of doubles down on the Neptune themes of like fog or like cloudiness, not being clear on what's going on. But I guess I kind of see this as like pretty, I see it as pretty malefic. We've got, Mars and Saturn there co-present, kind of, Saturn adding a heaviness, maybe, kind of emphasizing the fogginess as well with like that, with it being in Pisces. I think I've heard Austin Coppock talk a lot about Saturn and Pisces for him, like being really depressing. Like, I feel like adding that fog there, like as they approach each other is not helping things. And Venus, being the honored guest in Pisces, like she's not really there to do a lot of work either, right? Like she doesn't have to do like the activities she would have to do in Libra or in Taurus. where it's like her home and she kind of like stewards that. She's just kind of like the guest of honor. And I think I've heard Krista here like talk about like that exaltation role being more of like, I'm here as like a guest visitor. I don't have to do the cooking and cleaning. I don't have to like be responsible for anything. I'm just kind of like here to chill and and be doted on. So she might tend to overindulge, I think, and especially with Jupiter ruling this and Jupiter being in Taurus, you know, there's like big overindulgent vibes that can be dangerous for people struggling with substance abuse. And then Mars there too, like Mars just being generally harmful, I think, kind of paints a not a great picture for this one. And Pluto, you know, Pluto's playing a role like conjunct the moon there. So yeah, sorry, I don't have like my usual jovial take on that one, but I think it does look kind of like a harmful day or two here with that transit. And luckily Venus moves quickly. But yeah, I guess that's my 2 cents. I don't know.
Well, and also just noticing that they've just moved into the bound of Saturn.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you think about bounds, you know, like the rules from which the planet can kind of operate. And so then, okay, well, where's Saturn? Saturn's in Jupiter's bound, and Jupiter's in his own bound. So again, it kind of speaks to the expansive, gluttonous potential of that day. And, you know, the idea of overindulgence and how does that translate, not necessarily with food or drink or, you know, narcotics. It can be overindulgence in whatever areas are kind of, there is already some seed of disillusionment. So I could see that there's potential for it being kind of a dangerous day for sure. And just thinking about healthy boundaries and waiting, because that's a good thing about Saturn is that Saturn teaches us the potency of waiting, and that things that you have to wait for generally have a lot more long-lasting effect anyway. So if there was the allure of something, maybe using that moment to just sit and stew under the covers. I like the idea of the luminaries not seeing it, of like just being under the covers and waiting for it to pass. So you can kind of be in that dreaminess, but don't take action on it maybe until May. I don't know, just kidding. Maybe just the next day. If no one else has anything to say, I'll move to the next one, which I forget. Oh, Venus and Aries. And hold on, I've got these nice little reactions. Venus and Aries. Yeah, so this is 2 days later. This is on Friday. This is Venus Day. And Venus goes into Aries. The sun is right there at the North Node, getting closer to Chiron. Who wants to lead us off on this? I can give my thoughts on it just because I just spent some time reading a good bit about just the idea that Venus is not at home in Aries, right? Because she's at home in the opposing sign of Libra. She's also at home in Taurus. But when we think about any planet that is 180 degrees away from its domicile, it's called an exile. So it's usually freed from the parameters of which it's expected to act, which I think is more appropriate for Venus and Aries. She's not beholden to the prescriptions of what a Venusian should be or do. So there's a bit of a rebelliousness and a free from the shackles of expectations with Venus and Aries. Sometimes it means you have to work a little harder because you're not at home. So I liken it to traveling and you just have a backpack on you and you get to move around very freely, but maybe you don't have things as easily handed to you. So there can be a little bit of exhaustion because you have to work really hard to kind of get the things that you need. But there's that freedom and that excitement, and there's a nice fiery purpose to Venus and Aries. Venus is one of the decan rulers. It's the last decan ruler of Aries. and so she'll get kind of to her own seat within the castle of Mars later on in the month. But when she launches in, she rules the Taurus house, which is that Jupiter Uranus conjunction that'll happen a few weeks later. So she's got dominion over some pretty big transits this month. But for this time, I kind of feel like it's like mom without the kids for a couple of weeks. She just gets to like let her hair down and do whatever she wants. And there's a fun kind of relief of this, even though she's leaving her exaltation and going into detriment. I feel not. I don't feel like this is necessarily like a harmful placement to Aries. That's just a personal opinion. So yeah, what other thoughts do people have on that?
I love a fiery Venus, but I'm with you on like, even though she's technically not doing so hot, I think I like Venus and Aries. I think it's interesting again here, we've got Pluto on the ascendant. As far as like omens go, it's kind of interesting with the moon there as well. I don't know if it's just speaking to, or in some way I feel like that lends itself to what's going to happen later in the month, or is an omen for that with the Jupiter Uranus conjunction and like the depths we're going to there. It's nice that obviously the sun is already is further away. She's going to get close and get burned up there, but they've got that 15 degrees of separation there, so that she starts her travels through Aries, not getting too burned up. And it's also interesting that the sun is conjunct the North Node. So I think, there's some like extra emphasis being placed on this as well. Like, there's just going to be like a big feeling of like, yes, like Venus and Aries, like, let's go. I feel like I get like energized just kind of thinking about that energy, and what that might feel like to have the sun kind of lending itself there nicely to whatever house Aries is in for people.
Yeah, and one thing that just I thought of is, Venus is representing women in general, and it feels like women particularly have kind of been, historically attacked, like, traditionally attacked and been like kind of vulnerable to aggression. And Venus stepping into Aries, I think I'd like it because it's Venus reminding the world of like women are powerful too, and this is a way for feminine power to be expressed in a very beautiful way. And maybe we're not domiciled, we are kind of on our own. I don't know, it has this nice, I feel like women might feel empowered through that Venusian Aries, and really just the power of the yin might be amplified. Whether it's gendered or not, it's like the yin power kind of gets highlighted, and maybe we're going to need that fiery yin warrior spirit through the month, because there's a lot going on just all over the world, but also just astrologically. And I feel proud that Venus is going to be in Aries for April. Maybe that's what I wanted to say.
Yeah, I like that Venus is in Mars's decan, and we've got Mars in Venus's bound. So Mars is bringing her the resources as well. So while she's fighting that fight, and again, going back to Austin Coppock's descriptions of the decans, he describes this one as the axe. It's the conqueror. So it's bringing that energy of the conqueror and the conquered. So what are we as women going to be? Let's pick a side. Do we want to aim to be the conqueror, or are we going to settle for being conquered? So let's bring this fire. Let's stand up and fight. I feel like Mars is really bringing all the fire that he can. We've we've got all that fire behind us to really get something going. So yeah, you could see a lot of women's movements really getting started now, really getting fired up, I feel. And also there's just that feeling of spring courtship rituals, that kind of time when that's all going. And Venus in Aries makes me think of the way that like fashion and everything gets expressed in a Aries kind of way, that you see fashion shows and things, don't you, starting up at this time. And those really, like when she's in detriment, or exile, that the way that art comes through can be really offbeat or unusual and quirky and quite fantastic. You know, it's not conventional, it's not going to follow the rules.
It's like that Cruella de Vil movie, like that Cruella fashion feels very Venus and Aries.
Yeah. So yeah, watch out for things like that. I love that.
All right, I'm gonna move on unless we have any final thoughts. This is one of the ingresses of like a planet leaving its exaltation to the next sign, that it doesn't feel so poor. You know, sometimes we kind of feel bad for the planet leaving, but for this one, I'm like, yeah, you left your exile, but then you get to go into Aries. So, Shauna, what are you going to say?
I was just going to say that while you're all talking about, you know, different significations, the image that kept coming to my mind just on a simplistic level is woman, she's got her backpack, she's going rock climbing, but she's going by herself. You know, that's very, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to exert my own physical ambitions and prove to myself that I can. And then Sonia, something you said, the passions of how Venus can express itself in Aries. Buying yourself flowers, like that seems so simple, but instead of waiting for someone to bring you flowers, like buying them for yourself because you like them, you think they're pretty, you know, like that kind of thing. Very simplistic.
Red flowers. All right, then 3 days later, we have a very packed Aries house with the new moon, solar eclipse in Aries, conjunct Chiron, which the one through line I keep hearing from all these astrological podcasts and other YouTubes is like all these astrologers say, I usually don't spend too much time on Chiron, but with this, it's like Chiron is definitely getting people's attention. And so I'm same. I usually don't spend that much time on Chiron, but he is definitely getting my attention. So Sonia, you're the lunation expert in the group. Sonia does really great mindfulness videos on her YouTube, Celestia Astrology. She does these beautiful meditations for the new moon and full moon. And so this is why I call her the lunation expert. So I'm going to pass it over to you because you also have an Aries moon. So you feel expert for this one.
Yeah, I do. So yeah, no doubt I'll be feeling this one. Okay, I'm going to start with Austin Coppock talking about the crown. And I've got this illustration from Nicole. I'm going to try and say it right. Nicole, I've been practicing this as well. Nicole and Art. And she's got this Wild Way Oracle deck, and she's got us here with the bear with the crown, saying take the lead. And Austin Coppock also calls this deck in the crown. And the reason is because it's double sun ruled. So we've really got this leadership energy coming through really strong. And he says to take particular notice when you've got, it's not very often that you get two signs, a double rulership. And we've got a lot of these in April. So it's really interesting that all these decans are showing up, and I keep talking about double Mars and now double Sun. And then the Sun's at its exaltation degree as well. So we've got this new moon, which is about initiations, new beginnings. Usually we don't necessarily see what's started. It's like something being planted in the ground. And that's what you often see, particularly with eclipses, that small things become big over time. So it's not necessarily a major event happening on the day, but it's great to journal because smaller events might be happening that can later become significant. And Nicola has given us the title of Take the Lead and reminds us that this decan's about sovereignty and how you shape your world. and the personal power, and also that you can be held accountable for your actions here. You know, when you act as a leader and you've got people following you, or even when you're shaping your own world, that you're accountable for those actions, and there's responsibilities that come with power. You know, and we see that with the sextile with Pluto, even though it's not like exact at this time, but the sun is moving towards that square with the sun that we'll be talking, the sun square Pluto that we'll be talking about later. But this solar eclipse feels like an initiation into it, like we're being set onto this path, that events might be coming up and things are being illuminated as well. Like always, even though it's a new moon where things are initiated, we still see the luminaries together telling us something about this. And I've looked into this particular solar eclipse. We see this is where the moon passes between the sun and the earth, and that's where the shadow is cast and the moon blocks out the sun. So you see this wonderful corona. And the USA is going to be very lucky in seeing this across the middle of America. There's going to be, it's going to cast a path all the way across, and it's going to create a cross sign with the eclipse from last year, the total solar eclipse that happened last year. So I think it's in 15 states it's going to be total, and then a partial eclipse in 49 states. So I think, yeah, if you want to see it, it's really now's your time. So what have I had some notes on the series. It's Saros series 139. And these series last for 1,300 years, 1,300 years that they cover. So you can look at the ingress chart of the first one to get some clues. But for us, we can just look back. The last one was in 2006. So it was March 2006, March 1988, and March 1970. So if you're old enough to have remembered March 1970, you can maybe think about events in your life and get some clues about where it's hitting in your chart. And I did look about whether it hits the same place. And apparently in each Saros series, it moves forward about 10 to 11 degrees each time. It moves slightly forward. So as this series progresses, it's in roughly the same area, but it just moves the story slightly on a little bit. So you can look back to where that was in your chart. And again, we do see leaders sometimes, particularly with this one being about the crown, leaders coming to the stage and leaders exiting the stage. So we saw an exit on the lunar eclipse, which was the Taoiseach of Ireland, Varadkar, and thankfully it was a resignation, and there can be more unpleasant ways that leaders can exit, but it was nice that it was a chosen exit, and maybe we might see a new leader entering. But we might not even be aware. It might be a small event of a leader that then becomes significant in 6 months, 12 months, 18 months that we might see it. But yeah, for us in our own world, it's about like reassessing how we take responsibility, how we take power, where we have power and how we wield it, and really being accountable for that, because the sun represents our consciousness. So yeah, that's what's important for me. But what does everybody else think?
Go ahead. Who wants to talk?
I can go. I also wanted to throw in there too. I don't think you mentioned, but I read somewhere recently that this is also going to be at the exaltation degree of the sun. So it's like tripling down on that solar influence. So yeah, I think typically my advice for people with eclipses has been like what you were just saying, where it could be something big, but it could also be something small. This one just feels so loud that I just have a hard time believing there won't be loud events. I don't know, just with the sun at that degree, with Chiron, with like the US situation and world events. Yeah, I don't have any like specific predictions, but it feels very loud is, I guess, my 2 cents. And
yeah, we did have that conversation recently, didn't we, where we said, is it that cardinal eclipses are just louder, because they're the initiatory sign?
yeah, I think that's a really good point too.
Mm.
I also think a lot about the Sun and Mars combo as being very tied to choice and how we choose to act. So I guess for me, that's what I've been reflecting on too with this, is like, what is your personal power? You know, similar to what you just said, but choice being a big part of it, and how we choose to move about the world, really coming into play.
Well, one of the things about just lunations in general, I think that like part-time witches will just use the moons, but like full moon and new moon kind of intentions. And if you think about a new moon, it's the darkest moment for the moon, right? It's at the exact same degree. And so if you think about it in the life cycle of a plant, you might later on in the summer have like the most luxurious moonflower plant that just takes over a trellis, and the luna moths come, and like it smells like the ocean, and it's just this amazing like character in your yard. But when you plant it, you don't know that that one little seed is going to be this like annual like character that you engage with, that you talk to, that you take pictures of, that you share on your socials. You don't know like how big of a player it's going to be when you plant the seed. And that's what we say, like, you don't know if that new moon moment is going to be as big as it is. So when if the eclipse happens and you're like, well, what happened? Nothing happened. You may not realize it until later. And so you can look at it 6 months time, you can look at it 9 years from now or 18 years from now. Like if you think about transits, that's just a snapshot of the sky at a moment, which is also, this is going to be somebody's birth chart. You think about that too. Like we were all born at a transit moment. And so many political leaders were born with eclipse energy. A lot of the royal family was born with eclipse energy, being born day of or flanking days of an eclipse. So I look at this not only as we're going to look at the leaders that we have chosen, what's their story going to be that we see reflected in the eclipse moment, but also the potential that some baby will be born that then plants a seed of a huge character in our life 18, 36 years from now. And we won't realize that in the moment because it'll just be a cute little baby. But that's how astrology can seem so subtle, but can also speak very loudly. And looking back through time, looking at nativities can give you some sort of context for it. But in a personal level, I like to use new moons because I'm a new moon child myself. So I find comfort in new moons. And, for anybody, this new moon might not speak to you very specifically, and you can look at your own natal chart. And if that 19-degree Aries either hits something very close to your chart by conjunction, so if you have something within a few degrees of 19 degrees Aries, that'll be fairly close, or if you have another fire sign that's around 19 degrees, or if you have another cardinal sign that's at 19 degrees. So if it's going to like touch your chart in a specific way, it might be louder. And I agree with Janessa. I think it's going to be loud, but I think it'll be loud to people that have that signature in their chart where it'll speak personally to them. Like yesterday, I had a very loud transit that I didn't realize until Shauna kind of brought it up, that it was a Mars opposition, and it spoke very loudly. Like literally, I was like sending them expletive filled voice notes because I was so furious. And I didn't realize it until Shauna reflected back of like, oh, you're in a direct Mars opposition, like to the minute. And so when a transit happens, it can speak to you very personally. And that's why I say astrology can help you put context into your story, not like I'm having a bad day or I'm just angry at the world. It's like I'm experiencing the stars through the filter of my nativity. and it kind of calmed me down. I was wearing a lot of red yesterday, and I changed into a bunch of green colors to like mute it because it was starting to infuriate me. And it was also, I was drinking lots of coffee, and it was just infuriating me even more. So it's like ways of like mitigating or remediating a situation. I did not want to be that angry. I wanted to kind of channel it. And astrology helps you channel energy, which I think is very powerful, to be able to channel it instead of it just spilling over in messy or irreversible consequential ways. So with this particular solar eclipse, I feel like especially if you have a placement that's around that 19-degree, 3 degrees on either side, I think would be pretty potent. There's usually, 15 degrees is, some astrologers will give, but the closer it is, the louder it will be. And if and there's no reason to fear it, or no reason to approach it with trepidation, but just approach it with observation that maybe it will speak to you very personally. And if I can recommend anything, it's just write down the things that happened that day, because if it is subtle, you may not realize it until later. You may not realize it until 6 months from now, or a year and a half from now, or whatever. I mean, sometimes these cycles take time to grow out of the ground, to find a tendril to climb onto, to bloom, to pollinate. I mean, things aren't always so obvious. And again, like Saturn teaches, it's like things that take a little bit longer have a lot longer memory, or a lot longer effect to them. So yeah, that's my 2 cents for the Aries eclipse.
Yeah, I just wanted to share something on that note of what you were saying, Krista. And I think it might have been Janessa that shared. Patrick Watson, who's another astrologer that we follow and learn from, shared that he had a eclipse that impacted his chart quite closely on his planet. So he was like watching and waiting and journaling and doing everything that we do, and thought nothing happened. And then it turned out that his future stepdaughter was born on that day. So obviously it was an important eclipse for him, but he didn't actually meet his stepdaughter for some time. So it shows how an event, and yet that date became very important in his life now. But at the time, he wasn't aware of what had happened. It wasn't an event for him at the time. But he came back to it, and he could see how that eclipse mattered. So it's like a particular example of how that seed can be planted, metaphorically.
Yeah, and astrologers use anecdotes to relay story. And the way we're able to do that is because we collect stories. We're like the hoarders episodes of stories are astrologers, right? And when we sit with people in readings, we want to hear stories because that helps. One, we're hungry for them. We love astrology good that are actually good stories, but also it's like putting the astrological moment into context of a human life. It's how we remember things. Like astrology is like the oldest story of time because it's a story, not just a data fact that has been lost in some Croatian monastery's record. It's like it's a story that we continue to tell. So it's I think it's important work, but it's also just fun to write down your own story of what happened and to be able to revert back to what happened with the astrology of that day. The Honeycomb Collective does those really beautiful journals that has your personal transits, and you can write the story in it. But as long as you date like year and month and day, you can go back and look at the ephemeris of what was happening that day, of even if it just seems minor. Sometimes the minor things become, eclipses great things become big, and big things become small. So sometimes those minor things actually do grow into something very monumental. So even writing down the tiny little omens that happen on an eclipse day might seem insignificant now, but may show themselves to be greater later on. Should we move on? Anybody? Does anybody have any Aries 2 placements? Sonia. Shauna has some Cancer 2 placements that will square this for sure.
Yeah, I've got my Saturn in there, and he's my Lord of the Year.
Right.
So this will be fun.
Yeah.
How about in the chat? Anybody? I know someone has a retrograde Mercury in Aries, but
yeah, and throw questions if you have any that we can look at, and as we go through these. I'm gonna. Do you got something, Shauna?
I was just going to say before we move to the next slide, it's not, well, kind of 2 points. First, just to kind of piggyback off of what you said as far as like embodying astrology, even just if you're journaling or you don't even journal, to get into the habit, make notes even just about the clothing you're wearing. You know, like Krista referenced having worn red yesterday, and she needed to embody that Mars yesterday for the situation she was taking on. So that was perfect. But being able to bring herself back down and hit the other side of the color wheel and, you know, embody Venus at that point with all the green was a great thing. Did you wear your green lipstick today? You're still a little small in my picture.
I don't have green lipstick, but as you were talking, I just realized I went to a school advisory council meeting, and the whole district, the mascot is called the Warriors, and I just realized that. So everybody was wearing red. I wore red because it was like, oh, it's the Warriors. That's like the color of the mascot.
Yeah.
So everybody was on fire yesterday. But yeah, I don't have green lipstick.
And rightfully so for the topic.
Yeah, yeah.
I guess so. And then I don't want to take it political or anything else because I cannot speak to those things with any kind of education. But the one thing that this particular chart makes me think of is early 2020 when we had just that huge planetary collision in Capricorn. But this one happens to be in another cardinal sign, but this one happens to be in Aries. And yes, it's some different planets at play, but it just makes me wonder moving forward how those things are going to come to fruition as the group, especially with Saturn still being in Pisces, and how that that whole collective mindset might come into play, and what we're not seeing at the moment. So I think that'll be really, really interesting to see what comes up.
Yeah, and we're you know, Mars is approaching Saturn. I think they're conjunct on the 10th. So we're 2 days away from a Mars Saturn conjunction. We're about 13 days, 12 days from a Jupiter Uranus conjunction. So there's some bigger stories happening. It's almost like Mercury doesn't know where to go. He's like, maybe I should just go check on the sun and the moon real quick before I go forward, because there's some big stories happening. Oy.
Definitely. Is our next slide for the Mars Saturn conjunction?
Woohoo! Yep, let's move over there. That
It
sounds
is.
like a fun
Yeah,
talk.
it is. Honestly, if it's okay, I was listening to SJ on a different podcast this morning, SJ Anderson, who I find so interesting to listen to, he and Dan Waits in particular, as far as the mundane stuff go. But he mentioned something really interesting about Mars in Pisces being active dreams or turning dreams into action. And I just thought that was such a really uplifting, even concept. I mean, unless you suffer from nightmares, which we want to avoid. But you know, it really made me think, Krista, you have such active and adventurous type dreams that you so willingly share with everyone, that I appreciate so much. But he also mentioned, well, in particular, the phrase "dreams deliver the action," which I think was really cool. But he mentioned, and since we're all just kind of Beatles fans, Paul McCartney received the, I can't remember if it was the lyrics for or the hook for "Yesterday" in a dream.
It was the melody, yeah.
Yeah, so I thought that was just a really cool, especially with Neptune still hanging out there. I just thought that was really very dreamy, no pun intended.
Yeah, I think it's both Mars and Saturn are kind of softened a little bit. It feels very Eeyore having Mars and Saturn here in Pisces. I think Mars and Saturn conjunct in other signs might feel a little bit more reckless, but in Pisces it feels just a little like wet cat energy. So maybe it's when malefics are Saturn and Mars. So malefics are going to malefic, and if they're in good condition, they're able to express their significations louder, and they're not really at home here. And so um, uh, I'm considering this conjunction because whenever the malefics get together, and especially whatever house that Pisces rules for you, you're gonna you have both malefics there already, and there's constraint with Saturn, and there's kind of um, uh, Mars likes to move, and sometimes he moves recklessly, but in Pisces, it's like moving underwater. I saw this drone footage of these wolves under the snow, and they would poke their heads up, but they had these tunnels that were going under the snow, and it felt very Mars and Pisces. Like there's danger under there, but as long as they're kind of just in their own pack, and you don't cross paths with them, just be protective and stay away. And um, you know I mean, Mars is going to move past this, but I don't really have any mitigating factors. It's like, there are hard things in life, and that's what makes the good things better, is because the good things are a foil to the hard things. So this might be a little difficult, whatever house Pisces is. Like, for instance, Pisces is my 5th house. So maybe I won't have a lot of fun that day because it's, Pisces, or the 5th house is like fun and games. It's like the Ren Fair house, like children and games and gambling. Maybe I won't go to a casino that day. um, Not like I go to casinos because they're way too far away from me, but I'm just saying, like, there's some actions that you can choose just to refrain from that might be a good remediation from that malefic. Again, if it hits a particular part of your house or your chart, it might speak more specifically to you. But other than that, I think it's like a kind of sit it out and wait it out sort of a day, just as a protective measure, because we recognize that Saturn and Mars are both difficult planets by nature. There's nothing wrong with them. They just provide difficulty.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, again, going back to the Deccan story, we've got Jupiter and the moon ruling this Deccan that they're in at the moment, and they're forming, it's wide, but we give the moon in Hellenistic astrology 15 degrees because she travels so fast. And when we look at this sextile that they form with the moon, and we see the moon right in between Jupiter and Uranus, so you've got the two Deccan rulers together, and that somehow feels significant. Right before Jupiter and Uranus make their conjunction, there's something that they're lending back to this Deccan, telling that story in the sextile, which is of the nature of Venus. So I feel a little softening there of that, in that. And what else did I think? I made a note of those questions that we had. We recently attended a speaker series with the Nightlight school, and we were offered some questions when some of these planets meet and converge. And with Saturn, we were asked about, what is your personal mountain? What are you building? What do you want to climb? And obviously, when Mars meets Saturn, you're given the opportunity for focused action. Like, Mars is bringing the energy and the courage, and Saturn's bringing the discipline. So even though these are both malefics, but you can create a healthy container if you focus on, okay, what do I want to create from this? Rather than just sitting back and waiting for bad things. What if you took the action yourself and gave them a job to do? What if you looked at it that way and said, okay, what are my dreams? What is my mountain that I want to create? Which of your dreams?
I love that.
Yeah, I really love making healthy containers when we see challenges.
Yes.
I've got
Listen to
challenges in the
Sonia.
world. I need a lot of containers. It's like, which of your dreams is true gold? You know, which of them really speaks to you? You know, because you've got this chance now to say, okay, what form could I create from it? And what have you outgrown? Because you can just leave it behind now. Leave it in the water; it'll just drift away. So you can be ready for that. And also, where do you need to mature? There might be areas where you're clinging on to outdated patterns, and Saturn offers that ability to mature away from it. But we need to sometimes bring that consciousness. That's what Saturn's asking of us, and he's showing us ways that we need to mature. And sometimes we resist that. So it's really okay. Mars is giving you that courage to do it, and Saturn's asking you to mature. And sometimes that can be really difficult when these things come up and we don't like it and we resist it, and that's where it can be hard. And seeing these two together, it can be hard because it's not comfortable. But if you really look at what dreams do you really feel, okay, I'm ready to go into this discomfort zone in order to build this dream, you know, you can make something really positive out of it. And the fact that you've got this sextile with this Jupiter-Uranus conjunction coming up and an exalted moon, it's like that there is benefic energy there offering some support. So yeah.
I love that. I mean, it's I like your advice way better. um, and I'm reminded, especially with that moon witnessing it and Jupiter witnessing it, is the word realize feels like a very Taurus word, to make real, to like take an idea and to make it real into form. And so I like blending all of like what you and Shauna said of like taking those dreams, those actions, like dreams in the like go to sleep REM stage sense, and then also the dreams of, you know, Jupiter finds his joy in the 11th house of hopes and dreams. So like, what are you dreaming, and what sort of healthy driven container do Mars and Saturn provide to help realize and make real those dreams? So I'm changing my mind. Don't set it out. Like, you're fully empowered to do what you want, but in a mature way, like kind of a growing out of the shell, which can be um, difficult or uncomfortable or painful. So thanks, Sonia.
Yeah, I
In a
was.
way, it just feels like, sorry, Janessa. It just feels like Saturn is tethering Mars so that Mars will slow down and think about before, you know.
Yeah, and I think this is the only time in that Saturn transit, unless I think that's the only time that Mars is going to be conjunct Saturn in Pisces. So to me, it kind of speaks to like a low, like being that they're both malefic, being like maybe the lowest point here or like rock bottom. And then again, like what Sonia was just saying, like kind of looking towards that Jupiter, Moon, Uranus situation as like the way out of that, or like the light at the end of the tunnel. But yeah, I guess I kind of, you know, if we're talking about Saturn and Pisces having themes of like depression, and then Mars being conjunct there, just kind of like amplifying that to the max, and that being the only time that they meet. I think, yeah, rock bottom is kind of what's coming to mind. Yeah.
From rock bottom, let's see what's next, because then we have the Mercury Kazemi. If you look at the on the 10th, we have Mercury retrogrades kind of approaching the sun, and the sun moving towards uh, Mercury there. And then on the 12th, on Venus Day, we have that Mercury Kazemi. I love Kazemi moments, and you know, having a planet kind of go through that heart of the sun gets, it seems like it gets like a sneak peek into the throne room of the sun. Mercury will go direct later in the month and get out of Aries like in May, but um, how do each of you use moments of Kazemi just personally I'll just kind of throw that question out. Janessa, you want to go? I'll just randomly picked.
Yeah, I guess it depends, but I think I mostly use it as like a reflection point. I really always try to make an effort to, especially with Mercury Kazimis, to like meditate that day and make note of anything that kind of comes to me. Even if I don't have the opportunity to meditate, I find that Mercury Kazimis, like, you'll get a message somehow, whether you're actively seeking it or not. So yeah, I kind of look for that, and depending on the situation, it might be a good time to elect to do something. I've definitely done that in the past too.
Yeah, and it looks like it happens just past midnight UK time, so that'll be at like 7 o'clock for the East Coast. So for those in Europe, it might come through in a dream. You know, Mercury as a psychopomp kind of coming through, but we'll be awake in the States, and all the way over to Australia, they'll be awake. So yeah, Sonia, how do you use Kazemi moments?
Yeah, much the same as Janessa. Sometimes I will light a candle to Mercury and do a little ritual for him, because it never hurts to help make some offerings to him and like work with him more consciously. And this is a really good time. The decan here is Venus and Jupiter, and Austin's image is roses in flames, and the tarot card is the Four of Wands. And it's interesting that is like a kind of celebration moment. But the roses in flames makes you think of, well, we're going to just be left with ashes, the beauty of Venus, but then it's made into ash. And I suppose that's kind of resonant of like that Aries thing of that quick fire, but it burns out. And that's kind of like the Kazemi moment as well. You're into that throne room, that he's in that exalted moment, but he's so close to the sun that he can burn. But if you're brave enough to stay and get the message and just risk that moment, and Mercury being reborn as well as the morning star, it's a chance for us to, I've written down a new way of experiencing embodiment, like a chance to step into our dream. If we're seeing this April astrology as like a transition phase for us from Pisces to Aries to Taurus, what they're bringing us, the challenges of Pisces, and then the fieriness of the Ariesness moving through to the Taurus breakthroughs that are going to be offered, and the eclipses there, and then this retrograde happening at the same time. Like looking back, it's like, are we going to step into this embodiment that Mercury is now offering? You know, and this is kind of like the moment of, do we see what it is? You know, that the eclipse is showing us a message, and now Mercury is, and we've had these dreams come through, and it's like all these multiple chances. And astrology is that. There's lots of new beginnings in astrology. We get the new moon every month. But this April, particularly out of the whole year, when we do our year ahead planning, April really stood out with all these significant transits happening. And it just feels like this Kazemi as well is one of those moments of do something to try and connect, even if it is in your dream, of like a conscious, maybe prayer to Mercury, or find his image, or make the sigil of the glyph of Mercury, or just something just to be conscious that this is his day of being in that exalted room with the sun, getting his messages, changing his cycle, making a new cycle for us.
And I love that the moon is in Mercury's sign as well. I thought that was a nice little wink.
Yeah.
Shauna, do you play around with the Mercury Kazimis?
I'm listening to Janessa and Sonia, and I just love how much intention there is behind both your your Kazemi moments. I'm internally laughing at myself because I feel like I always miss the Kazemi moment. I'm Cancer ascendant, which means Gemini's in my 12th house, and I've got Mercury at 28 degrees sitting on Betelgeuse, and I just feel like I'm constantly living in Mercury in a mercurial space. And so I feel like I'm always like, oh, shoot, that just happened. Now what? I feel like I'm always just playing catch up with it. Confetti cannons.
Mercury is the trickster as well. So I wanted to say just one last thing about this. I think that the best thing about Mercury retrogrades is that we get Kazemis. It's like the prize, you know, like the return back to of like going back, like Cinderella going back and getting her, you know, glass slipper. It's this kind of moment that happens because of the retrograde. So, and Mercury goes retrograde more than any other planet because he moves the fastest. Like the moon doesn't go backwards, and you know, uh, so people will often disparage astrology, and they know the phrase Mercury retrograde as if we blame things on Mercury for going retrograde, but he does go retrograde more than any other. So it's like a phrase that has slipped out of the astrology bubble and into the mainstream. But there's a reason for that. So then a few days later, looks like a week later, the sun moves out of Aries and into Taurus. And, you know, the big thing about just April in general is yes, Pluto is fully in Aquarius, but Pisces, Aries, Taurus, those three signs have the majority of all the planets in it. And you'll have these stack ups of planets often, but just thinking about those three as like a continuum of story of light, you know, this is the chunk of the sky that most of the planets are in, and they'll start to spread out later on in the year. We'll have a Mars retrograde. We'll have a Mercury retrograde in Leo. I think the Mars retrograde, is it Leo Cancer? I haven't gone to look and see. I think it's Leo Cancer.
Yep.
So it'll start to kind of scatter, but those areas of life, the topics of life for Aries, Taurus, Pisces, are really just being spoken to repetitively through all of these planetary significations. The moon's the only one that kind of like keeps stirring things up. And with anything going into a fixed sign, it's going to immediately square Pluto because Pluto moves so slowly. He's hanging around that 2-degree Aquarius. So the sun moves into Taurus on the 19th. But you would think that we would start off with the Sun Pluto square, but there is actually a bigger moment happening. Uranus and Jupiter, who have been getting closer and closer and closer since Jupiter went direct on December 31st last year, are finally conjunct. And they're conjunct at 21 degrees, 49 minutes, while the sun is almost at that square to Pluto. But to me, this is like the loudest, most confetti cannon, wild, wacky, inflatable tube guy moment of all the transits is this Jupiter Uranus conjunction in Taurus. And so I know that we have lots of notes about it. Janessa, do you want to lead us off? Just how do you read this?
Sure. Yeah. So to backtrack a little bit with Uranus and Taurus, I really loved something that Austin Kopik said on the astrology podcast. I think it was for the year ahead episode for 2024. And it wasn't quite a throwaway comment, but they didn't really elaborate on it. But I have not stopped thinking about it since, that Uranus and Taurus has really correlated with the rise of like cottagecore, or like slow living, and like this return to the earth type movement that we've seen like really heavily on Instagram. But in general, in trends, you know, like farmhouse chic, just kind of like the most punk, I think that Austin said the most punk thing thing that you can do in with Uranus and Taurus is like give up the city life and like move to the country, grow your own food, and like Uranus, you know, having the vibes of being rebellious and freedom seeking. Yeah, like that's the rebellious thing is kind of like this return to tradition in a lot of ways. Taurus being the sign associated with, like, I think of it as like the earth goddess sign, you know, it's ruled by Venus and the moon. So like big ties to farming and agriculture and gardening. So that's kind of like the backdrop, I feel like, to this transit. Jupiter's been in Taurus now it'll be a year in May. So it's kind of been like amping this up, and you know, Jupiter expands anything that it comes near. So I feel like this might be ramping up a lot of those types of themes. One really interesting related news story that has just speaks really literally to this is like, I think it's in France where the farmers have like brought in like bales of hay and have like used that like in the streets of Paris to like disrupt things. So literally like Uranus and Taurus like disrupting the status quo with agricultural means. So yeah, I wonder if it's going to be kind of like a high point of that. I also think that there's ties to Saturn a lot with this, and Saturn like being in Pisces. I think it's by Decan, where there's some ties, and it's not quite right with the modern rulerships for the decans here, but there's some like shared overlap with the Saturn themes, and Jupiter being, you know, ruling Pisces. I think there's overlap there. But I think a lot of this like the interest and the return to like the agriculture and the cottage core like really becoming a trend is a little bit naive, and there's like this sense that like it looks really good, it looks really fun, it looks really like peaceful and beautiful, like all of these Venusian things. But like what we don't see about that is the other side of farming, and like that is and agriculture work in general is like the Saturnine side of like death and like the hard work that it takes to do all of those things. That's something I've been reflecting on lately, is like there's like it all looks really good in Instagram pictures, but like you don't see like the slaughtering of the animals, you don't see the dealing with the manure, like all of those things. So I wonder if there's like a tinge of that, like that dreamy kind of like ethereal, like Neptune distorted image that we have of like, oh, I'm just going to move to the country and like grow my own food, and like kind of that bubble being burst a little bit by like Saturn and the reality setting in. But yeah, I guess those are kind of like the big like themes I've been seeing. I think another one that kind of relates to the Uranus and Taurus is like breakthroughs in like medicine and like health and like things that can help with wellness. So like that would be something I'd really love to see with this transit, that we could see some type of scientific breakthrough that lends itself well to wellness and health topics. But yeah, those are kind of the themes I've been talking about with clients, like in the background, or like, you know, regardless of what is happening in your personal chart in your Taurus house.
Yeah, they're at the exaltation degree of Saturn too, that 20, I guess it's the 21st degree, so maybe it would be 20 and some change, but that got my attention. And when you were talking about like the reality of farming, there's this like picture of a woman with blonde hair, and her hair is braided, and like the grass is braided into her hair. And when I saw that, because my sister is a farmer, I was like, bugs.
Yeah.
Evelyn has so many bugs in her hair right now. Like, it looks cute, and her head is probably full of bugs right now. But and also this morning I was like hand washing my purse because it got dirty, uh and so I was like, I legitimately, unironically need a washboard right now, and it feels very Uranus Taurus, of like the return to like technology from 100 years ago that is still functional. And when you spoke about like breakthroughs in medicine, I have a brother that had kidney failure at 19 and has a couple of kidney transplants, and he joking around, he's like, I just need a 3D printed kidney. And I'm like, this is a transit that maybe would break through and like have artificial organs that would be, you don't have to wait for a cadaver to have an organ transplant, that maybe we can 3D print an organ for your body so that you can become the bionic man that you've always wanted to be, you know, like that will save your life and keep you off dialysis, and have that breakthrough moment, because that's what Uranus is, a disruptor of the norm, and disruption can be annoying, and it can be harmful, and it can be devastating. Disruption can also be the crack open of light that we need in a situation. And so Jupiter there being a benefic, hopefully that breakthrough is something that is positive in a realized, a tangible Taurian earthy way that we can all experience. And also that the moon, so Taurus can't see its ruler Venus because it's in Aries, but it can see the moon, that barely at that moment the moon is just hanging around long enough to see. um, it's at 29 degrees and 39 minutes, so it's like just within witnessing view before it moves over into Libra. But those are all beautiful reflections. Thanks for sharing. Shauna or Sonia, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I've got.
I'm with. Sorry, Sonia. Mine's quick. Mine's quick. If that's okay. I was
Yeah.
just thinking, was it actual manure or was it produce that those farmers were putting in the road?
It was like bales of hay and maybe manure too.
Bales of hay.
Yeah.
And maybe manure. Okay, because I thought I saw images of them like dumping manure in the roads, and your reference back to cottagecore, and it's like the aesthetic pictures on Instagram or social media versus what is actually behind the scenes. Definitely different.
One thing I didn't say that I meant to is like also the backlash now that I've been seeing a lot, where like there's been like this rise in like trad wives, or like women who are like returning to like being homemakers, and like unironically, I think it maybe started out to be a little bit ironic or something, but now it's become like this thing of like women really going backwards in terms of like, being submissive and like being homemakers. And this is not to knock people that want to do that. I love doing a lot of those tasks myself. But like taking it to the next level where we've like regressed to a little too far maybe in terms of like women's rights, and the backlash kind of starting now in the discourse, if you will, sorry, another tangent, but thought I'd throw it in.
Yeah, Jenna, so you were right when you said about it being Saturn's decan. It's actually a double Saturn decan. So again, we've got another attention-drawing decan. And Austin Coppock describes it as prayer beats. It's the decan where you've kind of, and it's also, what's the card? The Seven of Pentacles, where you've done all the work, you've put everything in that you can, and then you've got to leave it to the fates to decide what's going to happen. And that just feels so Uranian as well, where it's out of our hands. We've kind of done all we can, and now suddenly this lightning bolt comes and it's going to do whatever it will. And he talks about in Taurus that particularly things like insurance come in because humans find ways to get around the fates. So particularly in things like farming, crops can fail. So you can put in all that work and do all that slow and steady Taurus thing of the planting and the nurturing and everything. And still the weather can suddenly throw a curveball at you. And so it's like there's nothing to do but sit and pray and have your prayer beads, and that's the quality, the story of the decan that we're in, where it's this double Saturn of, okay, we're, you know, who do we pray to? So that's kind of the healthy container again of okay, have we done all we can to mitigate here? What do we need to look around us? What precautions do we need to take? We've planted our seeds, but have we nurtured them? Have we? Let's not be naive and trust that everything's fine. You know, are there any other precautions we can take? And I've got some questions again from our webinar, which is about Uranus being the call to be authentic. And how important is it to you to be true to yourself? You know, are you okay wearing a mask? Or is there something, as this conjunction gets closer, is there something that you're starting to feel uncomfortable with that's coming up for you? And can you tune into that and listen to it? And what price would you be willing to pay for that? Because there always is a price if you're going to abandon a mask and be authentic to yourself. There's usually a loss. It might be friendships fall away, or, you know, coming out as an astrologer even has a cost, we've found. But what are you willing to risk? Because Uranus comes with risks, and we have to be careful that they're realistic. And for that, I would say check in with the friends around you, ground yourself, just to be sure when you get this urge for freedom that you're in a healthy container. It's such a good word, but you know, when those urges come up, you know, are the people around you all with one voice saying you're mad, or are they saying that's a great idea, go for it, but have you thought about XYZ? And when they say that, do think about XYZ, you know, and just make sure that you've done some Saturn work as well. You know, great for Uranus, great to have these breakthroughs and these ideas, but also what would Saturn want? And let's make sure Saturn's happy in this mix as well. And the archetypes that came up when I was looking at this was like the eternal child and Icarus, because obviously he thought he could fly to the sun, and he didn't take those precautions with the wax that melted his wings. So it is that thing of, yeah, these great dreams, but we've really got to be grounded in how we plan them out. So those are my thoughts. Yeah.
I love those. And one thing I was reminded of is, you know, there's the chart called the Thema Mundi, and it's the, you know, imaginary chart of the world. It's used as a teaching tool, but in the Thema Mundi, Jupiter finds his joy in the 11th house, but in the Thema Mundi, the 11th house is Taurus because it's a Cancer rising chart. And so if we think about, like, let's use that as like the chart of the world. So we think of the 11th house as like the collective house, the house of support that pushes to the 10th, which is the top of the chart. And so if we think of something breakthrough happening in the 11th house, kind of that we would collectively experience, in modern astrology, they use Uranus as the ruler of Aquarius, kind of the same thing. And while we don't use that, sometimes, you know, different types of astrology will rhyme or harmonize, even though they're not saying the exact same thing. But I just wonder with that conjunction happening in the Thema Mundi in the 11th house, is there going to be a collective thing that is shared that then begins a radical transformation in the tangible reality of Earth? And I had a reading with Nick Dagan Best, one of my favorite astrologers, and he talked about 2024 kind of being the real beginning of this century. And if we think about the 1900s, so from 1900 to 1920, yes, it was the new century, it was the 20th century, but the changes that happened then were still pretty reminiscent of the century prior. And then 1920s onward, you had things that, like, the cog in the machine turned in a way that there was no going back. Like, we left horsepower, we started to drive around in cars, you know, women received the right to vote. You know, there was that second wave of feminism that came after the 1800s. Like the gender roles started to really shift. Wars started to happen. It was like everything really started to change after 1920. And he speaks about April of 2024 kind of being that moment. And I glean from that, it's that this is the moment that April becomes the powerful month for the next 100 years. That's how important this moment feels. And while it might not be as loud personally to you, I feel like it's going to be personally loud to me because I have Mercury at 21 degrees, 49 minutes. So I'm expecting a message. I'll just put that on record, Mercury. But I feel like it will be collectively experienced as a shift, a very palpable shift. How that will be, maybe it will be subtle to a lot of people. Again, maybe it'll be someone that is born on at this moment that will go on to really radicalize the world and shift it forward in a way, hopefully for the good, because just because time continues on doesn't mean that we necessarily improve. We have to make the right choices to improve every day, all of us collectively, to do that. But I'm excited for this. I feel like it's going to be tangible because it's in an earth sign. I feel like it's going to be loud because Jupiter is loud, Uranus is loud. And with that position in the Thema Mundi being in the 11th house of hopes and dreams, I'm hoping it'll be for the good. And as astrologers, we need to be mindful of the time. So unless anybody has any final thoughts, Shauna, do you want to jump in? I know that you've got a slight delay, so I don't want to speak over you.
That's okay. I'm trying to be cognizant of it. The only thing I was thinking is, when you mentioned a cog turning, how beautiful is it that Uranus has like that 84-year cycle too? And it would push us just into the next century. And it feels like, those first 2 decades in my mind are, there's that giant mysterious hand that just starts pushing the wheel. And those first 2 decades are as that wheel is shifting. And then the second decade, the 20s, are when it finally lands into its next position. And then you can start that cycle all over again. So it's just
Yeah.
Yeah, and in Chinese astrology, they have 20-year periods, and period 9 started with the new moon in February. And so we have this 20-year period that corresponds with the Pluto ingress into Aquarius. I mean, there's lots of ages and lots of studies all over the world. It's not just astrology that kind of look at these periods of time. And this year is a kind of a potent time for all sorts of those timing techniques, across oracle use, whether it's Chi-Men Dujai or Western astrology. Again, like they harmonize and they rhyme with each other, even if they're not saying exactly the same thing.
I went to a ISAR lecture, and it was about Steve Jobs and about how all the significant points on his career were totally tied into this cycle of Uranus and Jupiter. All the releases of, especially the breakthrough Apple products, but also him leaving and coming back and forming different companies and everything, were all either oppositions or conjunctions. But he also mentioned that like great inventors are often born at this time. So somebody could be born now or born 14 years ago that we won't know of until 28 years, or multiples of that they become in our consciousness, but we find that they've been born like with a birth chart that looks just like this, which is really interesting.
Yeah, this is going to be somebody's birth chart, or many people's birth chart. So then later on, a few hours later, we go into the sun and moves into that direct square with Pluto, which we've experienced with the moon. As the moon has gone through a couple of times now, but this is the first sun square Pluto that we've had with Pluto in Aquarius this year, at least. So who wants to tackle this one? This would have been the big one that we would have talked about had the Uranus-Jupiter conjunction not happened earlier that same day. So again, I feel like this day will be astrology good. Squares are of the nature of Mars, so it's something to be overcome. And with any of the fixed signs, especially Scorpio and Taurus, you're going to have that square. The Leo suns, are having that Pluto opposition. But what thoughts do you got on the Pluto square?
I think it's hard to separate it from like the Uranus Jupiter conjunction, just because of the same day. And it's like applying as the sun is reaching that second degree leading up to it. But yeah, I feel like it emphasizes that again. And then it's also like bringing the sun in is bringing in the emphasis of choice and purpose and acting deliberately. And then Pluto with mixing with that is like adding a real depth to it. So like really getting clear on like what is the intention, I guess, and like a really like deep seated intention as far as that playing into the Jupiter Uranus conjunction. It's kind of that's how I'm seeing it.
Excuse me, I just wanted to say it feels like the Pluto Sun square is a little bit of like a bass drum, and the Jupiter Uranus is like the cymbals. It's like that holding phase with the Pluto square.
Yeah, and the good thing about the Jupiter Uranus conjunction is that one of the rulers of Taurus, the moon, is visible, but with this, both Venus and the moon are not visible. So the traditional rulers of Taurus are Venus for domicile, moon for exaltation. And in this situation, once the moon immediately gets out of Virgo into Libra, the sun is kind of on its own as far as rulership. And so it feels harder just for that, like just to kind of be on your own and have to kind of mature up and deal with whatever thing to be overcome from this Pluto square, because this is going to happen like 19 other times, like through the cycle. So it's not a one and done thing. It could just be something that is like you're going to have to deal with head on. And squares with fixed signs always feel harder because fixed is about sustaining light. So they're, fixed signs are proud of holding things in a continuum. And when they have to be redirected, it can be a little more, a little less graceful, and it can be a little messier sometimes. So finding grace in this moment might be key. But again, it's it's I like the idea of like that bass drum of just like keeping the beat to go forward and being grounded. Sun and Taurus is a grounded place. It's in Venus's decan and bound, so at least it has kind of has all the tools available that it can without seeing its rulers there. So
yeah, and going back to the decan story, we've got the two tarot cards, both fives. We've got the Five of Swords for Pluto and the Five of Pentacles for the Sun. So that's indicating conflict here over resources and the truth and clarity, issues like that the decan story is bringing in. So again, that comes back to the questions. Where these decans are looking at those issues of conflict, and it probably is likely to be internal questions that it's bringing up for you. But where does your pull for personal power come from, and where do you shine your brightest light? Does it scare you to shine your brightest light, and why would it scare you? Do you make yourself smaller, and for what reasons? So if you were to embrace your greatest power and shine your brightest light, how does that look? And to really, squares are of the nature of Mars, so it can mean cutting away things, but also stepping into our courage. So if you were to like re-examine, okay, what would it look like if I was in my personal power and shining my brightest light? how could that look, and what would I cut away? I mean, it's again that mask and being authentic, and these questions coming up for us with these big transits. But it feels like an evolving story throughout April, that we're being challenged again and again to look at these things.
And challenges fortify things. But I know at least the 5 of coins is called the Lord of Worry. So it's not an easing card. The image is 2 characters that are kind of wounded on crutches and bandaged outside in the snow of a building, looks like a church. And the lesson of that is, 5s are discomfort and something to be overcome. It's like a challenging card anyway, is to be willing to ask for help, is like a nice remediation for that card, to recognize that maybe there is sanctuary very close to you, and getting out of your own way to ask for help could be a Pluto square theme too. I'm going to move to the next slide because we have a handful more, and Janessa's going to have to leave us in about 10 minutes. So I want to get her thoughts on this, because she shares some Scorpio placements. And this is the full moon that's happening 3 days after that celestial party in the sky with the square and the Jupiter-Uranus conjunction. So yeah, if you have time for this, Janessa, we've got a few more, but I wanted you to kind of put your 2 cents in for this.
Yeah, definitely. I haven't spent as much time with this one. Yeah, it's interesting that it will be, the moon's being ruled by that Mars and Pisces again. So the Pisces themes like really coming into play here. And Saturn being co-present. And then again, it's Jupiter ruling that Mars. So, and it's still like pretty closely conjunct, less than a degree from the meeting with Uranus and Taurus. So, and that being opposite the moon, I think, and with co-present the sun, I think it's bringing up a lot more of those same themes. And if you didn't feel it with the Jupiter Uranus conjunction, this might be another point that you might feel something. And maybe it's highlighting something that was unclear before, being that it is a full moon. So I guess looking back, it might be a good point at looking back at where like the Scorpio new moon took place and what went on then. But yeah, I guess I'd turn it over to Sonia because she's our resident lunation expert on this.
I think the title of this card is appropriate, that Nicola's intensity is appropriate, especially because the moon and the sun are in a square, just past slightly with Pluto, but they're both kind of engaged. It's like Pluto's holding court with this lunation that just adds to the intensity. The aptly named Scorpio 1 card for that. You're muted, Sonia.
Thank you. Yeah, Pluto brings that catharsis element, doesn't he? And that's great for Scorpio, because Scorpio brings that energy as well. And yeah, we've got another double decan because April is just full of them. So this is double Mars we've got here. Scorpio 1, 5 of Cups, which is that disillusionment card where the figure's staring at the 3 overturned cups and not realizing that there's 2 behind him that are upturned. So that's where that potential for disappointment is coming in, but also that intensity of focus on those 3 that are overturned. And Nicola, see, I practiced it before and then it comes out. About the Scorpio with a spear, ready for action, like really ferocious and ready to fight for what she wants. She's got that hunger. She's going to go for it. But she's also asking us, what are we hungry for and how can we satisfy it? And what if we fail? Have we considered that? Do we have a plan for that? And what if it's not satisfied? And what if there is disappointment? You know, how will we cope? Because that seal isn't contemplating disappointment, really. But we should contemplate all eventualities, especially with that Five of Cups sign. So yeah, we've got this exciting time of the Uranus-Jupiter conjunction separating with the Sun co-present there, and the tension with the Moon that's in full. So that's really what's being illuminated at the time of the full moon. We're being shown, everything's being revealed, what's been culminating. And especially in Scorpio, with the strategic element, the planning element of Scorpio, this is really the time to sort of dig deep and kind of put those plans together, but consider all of those eventualities, I feel. Especially with that Pluto, like, coming into it, you know, bringing that five. So we've got the Five of Cups, the Five of Pentacles, and the Five of Swords now all in play in those decans. So yeah, if you like those visual images, remember that seal, but remember the challenges that he's facing.
Yeah, and also just to piggyback on that, I'm realizing that because of Mercury's retrograde, it's moving closer to an Antisha between Saturn and Mercury, and there's like mutual reception by detriment, because Mercury, Saturn is in fallen Aries and Mercury is in fallen Pisces, and so when a contra Antisha is like a secret opposition, so it's like it feels just more to that tension, maybe unspoken tension, or some sort of thing that's harder to clarify, like I'm doing now. It feels like there's some sort of a tension point that might be harder to pinpoint at the same time that this lunation happens.
Yeah, so it's kind of giving, don't take your eye off the ball, make your plans carefully.
Yeah.
Kind of energy.
Mm-hmm. We finally get some Scorpio energy to shake up all the Pisces, Aries, Taurus. All right, so I'm going to go to this one. So I'm going to go through the slides real quick just to see. So we have a Mercury direct, we have Neptune conjunct Mercury, Venus, Taurus, and then Mars and Aries. That's the last ones. So with that, we'll say bye to Janessa. I know you've got to go. Thank you for joining. You can find Janessa on By Jove Astro. Do you want to do a quick pitch before you log off?
Sure, thanks. Yeah, you can find me at By Jove Astro on Instagram, at By Jove Astrology on Twitter. I have many offerings on my website at byjoveastrology.com. And yeah, thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Janessa. She's going to go away as we talk about Mercury going direct. At 15 degrees Aries, 15 is Mercury's exaltation degree. He's not exalted in Aries, but I like that he found a familiar point to kind of turn around. And so this is, April 25th. This is like a month from now. He finally goes direct right there at that North Node point. So it's almost like he had to go say something to the North Node before he could leave. That's how it feels. And yeah, Shauna, have you looked at this chart yet? I'm famous for just like putting people on the spot. So sorry about that.
No, that's okay. Honestly, I love that note about Mercury going back to the North Node, because North Node is very intentional. If we refer back to Nick Dagan Best, I don't think I will ever forget what he said to you. Manslaughter versus homicide. Is that right? With the South Node, North Node. So if North Node, in a much more friendly term, is intentional or directional, or, onward, Santiago, it's great that Mercury goes back, collects all those things, and then, okay, I've got everything I need. My bag is packed. Let's go.
Sonia, what do you think about this?
Yeah, we're going back to the crown in terms of decans and the Three of Wands. So we've got another double sun. So again, all the important decans are coming out to play in April. So Mercury's kind of got his crown on, like where he wears that inverted crown. It's like, okay, he's ready now. He's got all his Aries information, like you say. He's collected it. He's gone back to the North Node, and now he's going to move towards Chiron. So he's giving us an opportunity, whatever we need to heal with Chiron. If again that we want to work with Mercury with intentionality, because Chiron was involved in that eclipse, and so was the North Node, and Mercury is bounced between the two, and now we can move towards Chiron with that intentionality and look for healing again for whatever Mercury has gathered up for us. I really like that, but we've got to remember Mercury's still in shadow until the 14th of May, I think, when it goes back to 27 degrees, which is when things will really start to move forward with the new products. So we're still looking over things that have come up before, still going over the old stuff, but a little bit of relief if you've really been feeling it, particularly those with the Aries placements or the Mercury in Aries. The shadow can be deceptive. You can think things are over, but it can still bite you in the bum. I have found in my experience of knowing when that period is, but it's in Mercury's term, so it's got dignity, which is nice. It's kind of a nice place for it to happen as well. I kind of like that.
Yeah, and if you're in a Mercury year, or if you're Mercury ruled, you might just feel these more, but the direction when he goes direct, and then especially when he gets out of shadow, I think will be days of good news, at least maybe not fumbling around or having to go back and redo things over again like retrogrades are famous for. Yeah, I'm going to push it over to what day? So that's the 25th. And then on the 29th, we still have Venus is there in Aries. We have Chiron. We have Mercury. He's now direct. The North Node is right there in the very middle of Aries. We still have Mars and Jupiter. Sorry, Mars and Saturn and Neptune and Pisces. We've got 3 planets. The Jupiter-Uranus conjunction is still pretty close together, and the Sun is there in Taurus. We have a moon over in Capricorn, but the Neptune conjunct Mars. So, as all those planets go through Pisces, they conjoin Neptune because he's just a slow, he reminds me of those slow motion ocean, like things at water parks. You just kind of float around. So Neptune is that inner tube that is just like slowly circling down the slow motion ocean, and all these other planets kind of meet up with them. How do you look at when Mars conjoins it in Pisces there? Sonia, you looking at your notes?
Yeah,
I'm
yeah. I've written down like spiritual and creative vitality. Like if you want to bring that forward, Mars giving that extra boost, and compassionate action and flexible resilience. Like that's what Mercury can offer in the positive. But there's also the shadow feelings of like that Neptune fogginess of that pointlessness and malaise could be amplified, and futility feelings could come in. And I wrote an archetype that I found was like nirvana, of entering into the mystery and sacrificing one's ego into the great dissolver, like Mercury dissolving things and like literally offering up your ego, like where Mars is that like warrior ego and being the soldier type, where here he's forced to literally take all that armor off, and Neptune just isn't a Marsy kind of energy. The two just clash. So Mars literally to go into that meeting with Neptune has to take off all that armor and take that mask off and be himself. like literally stripped down. And Neptune's going to dissolve that armor from him if he doesn't. So that there is a stripping away, I think, here.
But that's good preparation, like getting that old skin before Mars moves into Aries. You know, it's like you need to let all this go. You need to have that dissolution so that you can be reborn back home and like purge that closet so that you can kind of step into kind of a new version of yourself. I like that dissolution of armor.
Yeah.
To play on that, the moon in that sextile then, or will be very quickly, with the Mars Neptune as well. It feels like it's an emotional release, maybe, or a letdown, or not a disappointment necessarily, but like a surrender, even. Moon in Capricorn isn't always happy, but sometimes you have to get to that that moment where you just kind of go, okay, this is it. And acceptance is.
Yeah, Moon in Capricorn can be very pragmatic. You know, I don't dislike a Moon in Capricorn for sure, and it can see Saturn over there. So I think the moon is a good witness for that moment. Spot on. So then the next day or later on that day, Venus leaves Aries, comes back home, speaking of, into her own double decan.
Yeah.
Or double, yeah, it looks like domicile and decan and bound.
Mm.
So she is fully at home there. And soon to be square by degree to that Pluto, just like any other sign that's going into Taurus or Scorpio. But what I love a Venus and Taurus, of course. She's at home there. But Sonia, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, just bringing the Empress archetype. If Mars in Aries is the Emperor, you've got Venus in Taurus as the Empress, and both in their domains, and that yin and yang quality of you need both if you're going to effectively rule a kingdom. You kind of need both that martial decision making, but also the softness of the Empress ruling in a different way. And yeah, I think her joining at a time when we've got the sun there, and that conjunction of Uranus and Jupiter still separating, and we spoke the other day about how Jupiter really starts speeding up now towards the ingress to Gemini, but it's still there, we're still feeling it, and it's like Venus is bringing like the peace and harmony to that softening down of, okay, cool your boats for a minute, cool that speed, and just like let's look at what we're creating here. Like, let's make it beautiful, let's make it artful, because that conjunction is also known to be about art and movies and music and new genres emerging as well. And it's like Venus is going to really ramp that up, I think.
Yeah, and speaking of Mars, so then the next day we have, Venus coming home to Taurus, and then Mars coming home to Aries. So the Emperor the Emperor gets his new armor, while Venus gets her new beautiful garment. So it's like they both come home maybe a little weary from all their travels of, it's been a while since Mars was at home in Scorpio. It's been a while since Venus was at home in Libra. So this is the springtime version. And you're, Sonia, you're talking about the fashion and things maybe being a bit more revolutionary and exciting, and the fashion shows, and that keeps kind of coming up with this, of like just that springness of like presenting yourself in your authentic way. You've kind of gone through all these trials, being questioned about, are you being your most authentic self? What do you have to let go of that maybe has been a drain on you, so that you can kind of step into new power? And this is like the coming home to all of that. Like I've kind of gone through the ringer, and now the the Mars and the Venus are at home where they can rest and they can kind of really be themselves in a way that they haven't been able to be in a long while.
Yeah, it really sort of closes out that story, doesn't it, of the April astrology, of the way that we're moving from that Pisces through Aries to Taurus, and Taurus being so fixed and getting the things done, but Aries getting that burst of, okay, Mars is here at last. He's gonna, anything that still needs doing, Mars is gonna make sure it gets done. Anything that the solar eclipse needed that energy boost from, Mars is gonna do. And like you say, it's just that settling in of everything, of okay, we've had all this upheaval, we've had these breakthroughs, we've had the eclipses, and it's all been shown, and now at the end, those two planets that rule so much for us, they're personal planets, they're both home at the same time, and it just feels a nice closing out for us.
I will say that the moon is in that last quarter square to the sun, so maybe there's one final little story that needs to wrap up. The moon there, really close to Pluto, again squaring Venus, but sextile Mars now. So
Yes.
there's a little bit of a new connection with that Mars Pluto sextile. But yeah, that last quarter moon did get my attention. Of like, you might leave your pillow at the hotel and it has to be mailed to you, so to speak.
Yeah, because the story never ends, it's ongoing, but it's like April, it's like everything, all the cards are thrown up in the air, and now they're starting to settle, and we start to see where they're landing, and or not, as the case may be, because we talked about how long it can take for things to show themselves, but we kind of know where we are now, with a lot of it. And like you say, but the stories on go, don't they? The moon is always gathering her information and disseminating it to us, so she's bringing it in.
It's a little bit like it's Friday afternoon, and John gets home from traveling all week and finally gets to come home and throw his sweatpants on, but then realizes, oh crap, I got to go mow the lawn, and because Jane has been taking care of the house all week and dealing with the kids, she finally gets to come home and throw on the yoga pants and put up the messy bun, and okay, there's still work to be done. I still got to make dinner. I still got to clean the kitchen. I still got to do this and that. So imagery.
And also, I'm looking ahead to the ingress, especially Jupiter into Gemini, but then Venus into Gemini and Mercury into Gemini and the Sun. I mean, like, there's going to be a lot of Gemini going on during Gemini season. Gemini season is going to be extra Gemini this year. And so this is also that pause or that calm before the storm of Gemini, because Gemini is just going to be fast, and it's going to be expansive, and it's going to be um, slightly deceptive. I feel like there's going to be lots of quick deceptions. I feel like we're going to fool ourselves very easily during Gemini season. And so just having these two planets at home feels like, let's anchor in familiar ways to fortify and enjoy and rest before June happens, because I feel like June will mimic April and kind of the franticness of it. Um, April is definitely the loudest because of that Jupiter Uranus conjunction, but May 24th on, I feel like, will also be kind of frantic. And then we get some more retrogrades. End of Cancer season and Leo season are going to be pretty wild. And then in the fall, we're going to have the first of the Pisces Virgo eclipse. So it'll change the story a little bit. So from this moment, from April 30th to about May 24th, there's going to be a little bit of a resting period that I think that we should all just enjoy. May feels very sweet, very comforting, and a little bit luxurious. Maybe kind of celebrating the results of the conjunction of Jupiter Uranus. Maybe I'm putting too much on it. I don't think so. I think I'm underselling it, honestly. And with that, we kind of close out the month. So I'm going to stop the share on this. if
One
we
other
can.
just last thought is what we will see as well, is all those personal planets moving past Uranus. So that's going to happen quite fast as well as they start speeding up before they reach Gemini. So that'll be interesting.
Is Uranus going to go retrograde again in 2024?
I've got September the 1st. Yeah.
That's Pluto, right?
No, Uranus, September the 1st in Taurus. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
From 19 degrees to 27, if I'm reading that right.
And then Pluto will go around that same time too. It'll dip back into Capricorn before it moves fully in. The big ones are the Mercury fire retrogrades, and then that Mars Cancer Leo retrograde that's going to happen. So Venus is not retrograde at all 2024, which I'm thankful for.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. You have any final thoughts? Shauna, do you want to tell people where they can find you, and any final thoughts just on April in general?
I'm already tired of April. No, it's just such a big month. Hopefully it'll be exciting and good for everyone. And Krista, I agree with May, is going to be just where you can breathe and maybe step outside if you're able to and enjoy a little bit. As far as where I'm available, schedule is coming. Hopefully we can link it for the video. I'm available on X or Twitter at @smartastro, smart_astro, 2 S's in astro, and on Instagram at Figures of Heaven. You can also just DM me if you have any questions or want to.
Sonia, do you want to let people know where they can find you, and any final thoughts on April?
Yeah, it's really for April. I mean, I know with Pluto being in the conversation, a lot of that is about surrendering. But with the Saturn conjunctions and everything as well, you know, asking those questions of ourselves and looking at where we can create healthy containers, I think is great. If we know the astrology, we can't control it, but we can get ahead of it by just reflecting on what it's asking of us in our lives, particularly if it's affecting our charts. And if we know where that energy is coming in and what we're being asked to do, that gives us a heads up. You know, like you were saying with yesterday, knowing that it was a Mars opposition helps. You know that you were getting angry and channeling that in a positive way. It really does help to have those symbols reflecting back to us what's happening in the real world. And that's why astrology is so beautiful and wonderful, that it's not something to be scared of as we see these things, but to welcome these changes and these shifts, because life evolves and it's a story. And being open to releasing the old, that we can shed our skins, and that's okay. You know, and we're meant to evolve and move forward, and being willing to recognize those signs and welcome what's coming forward for us. But yeah, you can find me. I'm Celestial Astrology on pretty much all of the platforms: YouTube, X, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. And I offer astro mindfulness with the full and new moons to just help you align with that energy and find out what it is asking of us. And I love to do astro coaching, which again is just working a little bit more deeply with what's happening and what your chart shows and where your dreams are, where you want to go, and how we can get you there.
Great, thanks. And as a Scorpio rising, I appreciate advice to transform, because we live lives of transformation, and it's nice to see the context of your transformative story, because we all transform whether we're Scorpio risings or not. And yeah, I'm already tired of April too. It's I made an April calendar, which I forgot to link up here, and I'm already tired of looking at it because it's just too much. So one day at a time, and write down things that happen for yourself. I feel like it's helpful information, and especially if you go see an astrologer. I do natal readings. I love doing solar return readings. They're kind of my new favorite thing to do. I like looking at the solar return chart. That's when the sun moves to the exact position, degree, and minute from which you were born. But all the other planets are usually in very different positions, including your rising sign. And I think that it can speak to just the omens of the year and being able to look a year ahead. But I do natal chart readings. I do tarot readings too, mostly around the eclipses. I feel like they're helpful to kind of put yourself in a story of what's going on. And you can find me at Practical Astros on the usual social media sites and practicalastros.com. And with that, I'm going to end the stream. Thanks for joining Asteri, Sofia, Kairos. This is a collective of Nightlight Astrology students, and we get together on the Sabbats, which are the equinoxes and the solstices and the midpoints in between, and we talk about the seasons and the astro weather. We did this today because we did not have time to do this. I mean, we are 2 hours and 15 minutes in of really paying attention to and giving detail to all the transits. We touched on some of these at our last Sabbat, which was Ostara, which is the equinox. We decided to do a live stream just to kind of get it out of our system to talk about these transits because there's so much of them. That Sabbat happens 8 times a year. The next one is Beltane. So you can follow us on Twitter, on Instagram, and on YouTube here if you follow the channel. So you can get heads up. The Beltane one, we're hoping will be more of a party and just talking about the celebration of the good vibes of May compared to April and June, the flanking crazy signs. As a Taurus sun, I can tell you that I'm used to the flanking crazies of Aries and Gemini on each side of me. Just joking. No astro shame here, but that's the reason why we did this today, is because there was so much going on, and we usually do this within a framework of our Sabbat gatherings, which you're welcome to. You can register on through our newsletter. So if you go to Twitter, it's A_S_Kairos. I think that's what it is. But if you follow Celestial Astrology or Smart Astro or Practical Astros, you'll see us. We retweet the Asteri, Sofia, Kairos a lot. So you can follow us there. You can join the link. It's a Zoom link. You can register for the next one. The next one is on April 29th. So we're going to be right when Venus comes home. We will do the Beltane celebration. We always do it just before the next Sabbath so that you can kind of get prepared for it. There's a meditation that Sonia leads. There's recipes and crafts that we share. Shauna always gives us these beautiful crystal grids, crystals that are accessible to you that you can kind of use to incorporate into your life. That we talk about just the history, a little bit of the context of the history of why we celebrate that time of year, what the season is. Janessa usually does some sort of a mood check, vibe check of the whole season. So that's generally what it is, and it's usually about an hour. But as you can see, we needed to just bump this and talk about all of the astrology because there was so much happening. I don't think that we'll need to do it in May. I think we can probably fit it in May, but we might have to do it for June because there's a lot of stuff going in June. But with that, thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll sign off here. So,
yeah, thank you. Goodbye.
ciao.